Welcome pilots, my name is Hybrid V and today I wanted to talk with you all about the new changes coming in 3.14 with the capacitor system and the changes to combat. However, this time this video is not going to be a tutorialized guide. You see, there's a lot of changes coming in 3.14 and I wanted to go ahead and relay some of my thoughts about the actual build, the changes to combat and tunings, and just kind of give my overall thoughts on how things are going rather than doing a formal guide. I plan on doing an actual formal guide for the missile operator systems, the changes to the capacitor systems, and everything in between with my updated basic flight and basic combat videos that will be coming out later when 3.14 does go live, whenever that will be. So stay tuned for more if you do want to actually get some deep dives into that. So first things first, capacitors. Capacitors are an interesting concept. The idea is very simple, that our weapons no longer are essentially unlimited, or at least our laser weaponry are no longer unlimited. We fire the weapons, they have a limited magazine charge. Once that is either depleted or you just stop firing, the weapon recharges. Very simple. And the idea is that it's supposed to make the pilot deliberately think about their next move. So if I'm in a dogfight with another player, I know that I have a certain amount of time I can put rounds downrange on my target before I need to wait for it to recharge. During the recharge time, I could either choose to stay on target while I'm probably getting peppered back by the enemy, or I can choose to disengage and try to re-engage from a more advantageous position. After all, the new capacitor system also comes with tunings to the flight model. These tunings come in the form of limited boost capacity. So Afterburner is gone. It's basically just renamed. It's now boost. It's the same idea, but things have changed here or there. And now it's more of a limited function. It's kind of analogous to a sprint bar now. And another analogous system it's also akin to is like energy fighting or rate fighting. If you ever heard of those terms before in real dogfights, energy fighting and rate fighting is like, they're almost like a resource. You can, if I can try to kind of abstract that in a sense that makes sense. When you're in a dogfight, a nose gun dogfight, like whether it's a World War II plane or even a top tier fighter, energy fighting is a type of method where you're trying to either conserve or expend energy. So you're doing dives and you're climbing, and you're then trying to either expend this energy or gain energy in order to gain an advantage over your opponent. And the new boost mechanic is very much the same kind of idea. Once you start running low on boost, it becomes very hard in a dogfight to start dodging your opponent or to disengage. So you have to be very, very careful about how you actually engage the boost systems. If you use it too much, yeah, in that initial scrum with the other pilot, you're going to be more maneuverable, able to dodge more and get into better positions. But once it's gone, you're literally just left out in the open. There's not much you can do at that point, and you're going to get shot. And if the other player's been conserving their boost, they're just going to dance around you. So it's actually quite interesting to see. It also has the knock-on effect of making pilots that stay within SEM speeds have a higher advantage. And the reason for that is because if you are going at high speeds, like a lot of players tend to do, especially in PvP, you're going to have to expend a lot of boost to reverse your momentum. So if you get into a merge with another player and then you pass them at high speeds, you then turn around, well, it's going to take a long time to actually reverse your momentum and catch back up to the player. So the natural inclination of most players is to then hit the boost. Well, now you're at a disadvantage if the other player hasn't done that. You're lower on boost and you're going to have to wait for that recharge. A player who stays in SEM, while yes, they are slower and they can potentially get hit by someone who's booming and zooming, the problem is, if the other player does decide to get into a straight-up brawl with the other player, the one who decided to stay at the slower speeds and conserve their boost is going to have a major advantage over the other player, period. On that end of defensive gameplay where you're getting shot at, shields also had a change where they are now tied to the capacitor system as well, and they have a limited system where if they get hit, they have a cooldown, kind of like what we're used to before in the past. Then they recharge and they just go back to full, as long as they're not under fire, of course. The main difference here is that for smaller shields, size 3 and lower right now, everything is a bubble shield now, so there's no longer shield facings. Instead, everything is now shared. So if you're getting shot in the butt, then your entire shields go down rather than the shields on your butt. So it's a very, very interesting concept that they're switching to. It does mean also with these new tunings and these changes to the capacitor systems that the time to kill is much lower, which is really, really interesting. So with these changes to the capacitor system and the changes to our ship flight and weapons and shields, we now have a new system that allows us to redirect power when needed. It's actually just a repurposing of an existing system, our old PPT or power priority triangle, and instead now is being used to affect the capacitor system, so it actually has some real relevance and use in the middle of a fight. For example, putting power to weapons increases the recharge time and increases the capacity size for laser weapons. I didn't mention this before, but ballistics, of course, it goes without saying, ballistics do not have a capacity and are not affected by this currently. Then the next is thrusters. If you put power to thrusters, it actually reduces the cost of using boost as well as it speeds up the recharge time. So you can, if you have full power to thrusters, actually dance around your target a lot more. And then of course, finally, when you put power to shields, it reduces the damage the shield takes and also increases the recharge time, or speeds it up, I should say. And then of course, the drawback is if you go full bore into one of those subsystems, the other subsystems will not work as efficiently. Or if you go 100% into, for example, like shields, your shields will work fantastic, but you won't recharge any of your weapons, laser weapons, I should say. And you also won't recharge any boost, which could leave you at a disadvantage. But if you're, say, in a multi-crew vessel, you could just do that anyway if you don't have guns to begin with. So it's a really interesting system that they have there. And it allows you to be more engaged in the fight if you desire. It's entirely optional. You could play with the triangle completely in the center if you want. So beyond just the capacitors, we just briefly mentioned this, but the tunings were the big change that came in this patch. Many people didn't really think that they were going to do this, but it was a bit of a surprise until they eventually did announce that there was going to be a lot of changes to the flight tuning and balancing. And that came in redoing the flight models so that way fighters are going to fit more in their role where they're supposed to. Particularly light fighters, like they have the ability to use their boost to do more lateral directional changes so they can dodge, dip, and weave as necessary. Different interceptor type fighters can go in a straight line very fast so they can intercept their targets or catch prey that is trying to flee. Medium fighters, they're going to be much slower, but they're going to carry more weapons. They can boost in any direction. Their boost is pretty much generally on every axis pretty equally. And the same for heavy fighters as well. And the weapon balancing, like I mentioned before, also decreased the time to kill. But one of the bigger changes beyond just the laser capacity is that they decided to revamp ballistics to, instead of being just another DPS weapon that you can use that's limited, it is now a weapon that is extremely limited in ammo but does a ton of damage, which is very interesting. It's a type of behavior that leads people to now want to take either a mixed loadout or a full loadout of laser or Gatling. And full loadout is pretty interesting. You can definitely sustain for a lot more, but the time to kill is going to be slower. If you try to mix it up, you could, for example, say bring lasers that shoot down the shields of the target and then use your ballistics to finish off the target when it's unshielded. Ballistics still have the effect of partially penetrating shields, but they're far more effective if the shield is just gone altogether. It's quite interesting how this changes the meta around a bit. This is actually something we've been seeing the AI do before in the past, where the AI would use their lasers and then once the shields went down, they would use their ballistics. Players never did this ever. Players would always just use both their weapons at any given time. So if they had laser and ballistics, they would just go at it both full hog. They would never care whether the shields were down or not. And now it does kind of bring that dynamic into play, that where we want to actually bring the shields down before we use ballistics. It's a very interesting idea. Again, you don't have to if you don't want to. It's just not necessarily the most optimal play. And you're definitely going to be using a lot more ammo, and ballistics are pretty low in ammo as it is now. The other thing that's very interesting is how well the entire system really exaggerates the differences between individual weapon systems. So for example, laser repeaters and ballistic Gatlings and ballistic repeaters, excellent weapons against fighters. Now cannons, while they do a lot of damage, they are much more exaggerated in that they have a much slower, not necessarily rate of fire, because they did increase the rate of fire on those weapons, but they have a much slower projectile speed. So you're more apt to use those against multi-crew ships because fighters can just easily dodge out of the way. So I'm a big fan of that. I do love that there is a distinction. I know some people don't like that. They like the idea of someone getting good using cannons in, say, a PvP dogfight situation. I don't mind certain weapons kind of being pigeonholed. Well, I don't really like to use pigeonholed. It feels like a negative connotation, but in a certain way, it is fulfilling its specified role. So if a cannon is designated as an anti-material weapon, then I would expect it to be something to be used against something with heavy armor and probably a bigger target. Now, if I'm going against a light fighter, it's definitely going to be suboptimal. It's not impossible, but suboptimal, and probably not going to be a good thing if I'm going 1v1 against another guy who's got repeaters. This does leave an interesting gap in weapon design. So right now, the big workhorse amongst all players and all ships and weaponry is the Klausenwerner laser repeaters. They're on everything. They're on all the turrets. They're on pretty much most default loadouts. And the reason for that is because they increase the fire rates on nearly all weapons. So the laser repeaters themselves have an increased fire rate. They have a somewhat decent range. And more importantly, they are just excellent against everything that's super fast, that's moving around and very maneuverable. And they have a really high refire rate as a result. They have the other manufactured Hurston Dynamics that makes the attrition line of repeaters. And it's not necessarily a big problem with that. My main concern really is that we only have the two types of laser repeaters. We do have neutron repeaters, but it still seems like CIG is still trying to kind of balance where they want that to fit in the verse. Right now, the difference between neutron and laser and the regular KW laser repeaters, they really do feel kind of identical in certain ways. One does a little bit more damage than the other, but they still both fire really fast and are kind of similar. So CIG is still trying to kind of figure out what they want to do with that. And there's just definitely a lot of tuning still going on in the back end there. And unfortunately, with these new tunings still being worked on, there's still a lot of stuff left on the table that hasn't been touched. I know I flew with my org mate recently, and he was expressing concern about his Banu Defender because the Singe cannons are atrocious right now. Their projectile speed is incredibly slow, and they fire incredibly slow. He was having trouble dogfighting an Aurora MPC. That's how bad those guns are.
My weapons are ready before they're taking down a single shield face. What the
Put some laser repeaters on it.
Yeah. Why don't I just get a better ship and put laser repeaters on those? That's the whole fucking point of the Singes. They were supposed to be a Banu thing. Alright, well, this bitch is getting melted.
My suspicion is that they have not got to tuning that because having such low damage, such low projectile speed, and it just makes it awful. And it's like the Defender's supposed to defend the Banu Merchantman. And if it can't even fight an Aurora, then what is it supposed to defend? But on top of that, beyond the tunings and the ship weapon changes, we also have improvements to multi-crew in the function of the new missile operator mode, which we haven't talked about yet, but I want to get to that in a moment, which has been added to some of the co-pilot seats for a lot of different ships. And of course, the aforementioned changes I talked about to weapons have now gone to the turret systems for individual ships now. So if you're flying any type of ship that has a turret, it's going to have probably, give or take, a size 2, 3, or a 4 weapon, and those are going to fire blazingly fast at their target. It also looks like CIG did improve the assisted or the affixed assist system to help make turrets much more accurate, which I'm a big fan of because currently with turrets, if you're off of the pip by, I think it's like literally like 2 centimeters, just slightly off, the fixed assist is not as accurate. Currently how it is right now is if you're off of the pip, the fixed assist is going to be pretty darn accurate unless you're way off of the actual pip itself. So you have to be generally within the general area, and it's very generous. And some people may not like that, but I do because personally I like that multi-crew ships are much more of a force multiplier. They're supposed to be scary. Multi-crew ships to a fighter is supposed to be scary because it has turrets that are a deterrent system. So if you're a single pilot in a light fighter going against a constellation, those turrets are supposed to give you pause. But in the current builds, not 314 PTU, but in like 313 and prior, it was an absolute joke. In PvP, for example, a Connie with 2 gunners and you were in a Gladius, you would just laugh all the way to the bank. There was just nothing they could do to you. You would take down their shields so fast, and their turret gunners just didn't have the accuracy. They just couldn't do it. So a light fighter could take out a multi-crew ship like that easy. Now it is the other way around. A multi-crew ship can easily destroy light fighters in a single pass if they're not careful. This means that if you do want to go against multi-crew ships, you're going to need to bring friends. This is the distinction that we've been hearing about for a long time that CIG has been wanting to make. And the idea is that if you're in a multi-crew ship, like a Connie, like we talked about before, or even a Carrack, you're going to be extremely vulnerable now. Like, you really do need gunners. I mean, you're pretty vulnerable now in the current builds, but now more than ever, a light fighter can actually get in there and really chew you up if you're not careful. The new shields, like for example, giving size 3 shields to a lot of these different multi-crew ships does help a bit there because they do recharge pretty fast and they have a lot of health. but it does mean that you actually can take on a single multi-crew vessel in a fighter now if it has no crew. If it does have a crew, not going to happen, period. Subsequently, since these changes, I've been having an absolute blast in the PTU with my org mates, the Forgotten Heralds. We put together a couple events where we basically went in and we took everything from Connie's, Hurricanes, and even the Retaliator. It's an incredible, the sensation of being able to just go and do a bounty and taking on all these NPCs, and they're just all trying so hard to pound away at your heavy ship, and you just see all these guns fly everywhere. This is the Star Citizen I signed up for. And unfortunately, for most players, they never got that experience because a lot of those systems were just unfinished. It just simply was. You had turrets, but they were okay. They improved them in 3.10, but there was still a ways to go even then. And then with these new balance changes, these ships feel like juggernauts now. They feel like they can really take on the world, and it feels wonderful. I'm super happy for these changes. Okay, so missile operator mode. We haven't talked about this yet. I briefly mentioned it. But one of the new changes, of course, is the new missile operator mode system. It's very simple. Instead of hitting a missile button to lock your missile onto a target, instead now what it does is it switches to the missile operator system, which then arms missiles. You can then assign them to targets that you have selected. And it's very simple. It's quite straightforward. Okay, cool. Hit the target, lock onto the target. And the green circle that goes around the target is just the strength of the track that you're getting. So if you do a full charge on the track and you let it go, that ship's going to have to do a bit more work to try to fool the missile. One of my favorite changes, beyond just the new interface and be able to queue up multiple missiles and switch between individual missiles on the fly, is actually you can now use things like track AR, faceware, or even the built-in padlock system to do off-bore sight shot missiles. So you could, in theory, be attacking a target in front of you. Maybe you guys merge and you fly past each other. You're turning around and you're ready to engage each other. You're still a bit further away. But then you see his buddy is gunning for you and he's kind of far away coming at you. You could just look straight over to wherever he's at, lock him up, lock a missile, and snapshot a missile without having your nose onto him. The missile will then fly and start tracking towards him. This means that person no longer has the ability to just get guns on you. They have to try to evade the missile or dump countermeasures. They're not going to be able to put their attention on you anymore. And these things are really cool. The way they changed it feels more interesting. I know not everybody I've been seeing kind of likes the changes, especially for like fighters. Like they don't like that you have to do a whole new missile mode to launch missiles in a fighter. I really personally haven't had any issues with it. It's really fun. You can snapshot missiles. Like I said, you can do off-bore sight shots, so you can fire at targets that aren't even on your nose. And it just really feels fun. Like, I'll do either a PvP or against AI, and we'll get into a merge. And if we end up going too far from each other after we do the merge, I'll just throw a missile at them sometimes. And it's just really fun to just kind of change things up on the fly. It's really, really interesting. Countermeasures, they kind of go back and forth each patch. So we had... At one point, countermeasures weren't working, and then now they're very strong. It's really tricky. I don't know how CIG is going to balance that, because countermeasures don't feel too skillful right now. Really, all it comes down to is drop maybe 3 countermeasures, and any missile on you is pretty much dead. They're not going to track you. So that's gonna be interesting to see CIG try to balance that. Real life dodging missiles is extremely difficult and is not 100% a thing that can always be replicated every time. It really just depends on the skill of the pilot in real life, in a real life terrestrial dogfight. It depends on the skill of the pilot and the intel that they have to work with in knowing where that missile is coming from and what they can then do to execute maneuvers to try to avoid the missile, as well as using their countermeasures. Countermeasures, like in real life, countermeasures aren't just something you push and then missiles ignore you. That's not how it works. You have to actively be involved in the evasion of missiles. And I'm curious as to what CIG is going to do for that in the future, because one of the things that is going to be interesting is they could go that route and say, hey, look, we're going to make it so that way you actually have to try to dodge the missile while using your countermeasures. And my worry is that while that would be great because it does introduce a skill component, it does also mean that missiles may be a bit of a nuisance, really annoying a nuisance, because you could be engaging on your target, someone fires a missile and you're like, oh, okay, Now I gotta go full blast into Afterburner while dumping countermeasures or whatever. You're constantly, and then everybody's just gonna be using missiles. This is also probably why they made it so that way missiles are no longer a resource that you can get infinitely when you try to rearm. In fact, you can't get missiles anymore at all when you rearm. So if you fire a missile in the PU and you head back to port and you rearm, you do not get those missiles back. You have to physically store the ship, go into your Mobi-Glass, and assign the missiles back onto the ship, assuming you have extra ones in your inventory. Or at least that's partly one of the design decisions they're going for. In my experience in the PTU, sometimes when you do restock, you actually are given the missiles back. But then again, I also do buy tons of extra missiles because I've been testing different missile types. So I'm not entirely sure if the restock is just taking my missiles from my global inventory and putting it on my ship, or if it's just doing the old behavior of just restocking. And I have seen bugs also recently where you can restock and the ship will go through the process of restocking, take your money also, but then you don't ever actually get the ammo, or I should say the missiles back, period. So I'm not entirely sure what direction they're trying to go with it. My understanding was that you do have to physically put the missiles back on. It could be this system where you pay a fee for them to load missiles from your global inventory. I'm not entirely sure. CIG hasn't really talked about it much other than it being in a patch note at some point. So we'll see where it goes from there. I'm looking forward to seeing how they change that because I do actually really like this change because it makes missiles much more costly to use. So they may keep it how it is because they want to add that risk reward element where if you're going to fire the missiles, chances are the guy's just going to avoid it anyway. So maybe you want to hold off on using the missiles and wait for an opportune moment. But yeah, either way, I mean, they could also, like I said, add additional skill to it. It's very interesting. I am not an expert on balancing games whatsoever. I do not have the answer to it. If you have suggestions that you think would go well for balancing those missiles even more or adding more skill, let me know in the comments. I would love to see what your opinions are on that. So yeah, these new changes have radically altered the landscape of combat, which is, I mean, it's the language we've been speaking in Star Citizen for years now, which is just to shoot each other in the face. And now the landscape has been changed with the quote unquote apocalyptic changes. And what is interesting is that these changes are not the final changes. I mean, I've talked about, of course, that they are doing tunings and they're still working on it. This is the reason why this PTU cycle has actually been longer than most other cycles in the past, because they are just gathering that data. But recently, John Crew on one of his streams said that this is not the final change. There is another set of apocalyptic changes coming soon, and many people have been now racking their brain as to what is it? Could it be that we are getting computer blades soon, right? Because computer blades are supposed to be something that we could then potentially program to do automated turret systems and defenses or whatever. It could be everything from the new aileron system that they wanted to add into, which was to create flaps, like different flaps and stabs and things like that to allow us to move in atmosphere much more efficiently. The other thing was that they were doing physicalized ship emitters that you can actually destroy and cripple parts of the ship. Or it could be physicalized damage, which was something that I have talked about in the past before. So shameless plug, in the top right is an iCard. You can check that out if you want to see my video on that and you want to learn more about that, or in the description box below. But yeah, that is definitely a possibility. Physical damage is something we've been waiting for a long time now, and many of us are very, very excited to see if that's actually going to be the case. Okay, so with all that out of the way, what are the current issues right now COG are working on? Well, like I said, they're still tuning everything. There's still a lot of issues with the co-pilot seats. Right now, we, in our testing with my org, have only really gotten the Connie's co-pilot seats to work properly, meaning that we can actually change the power allocation and, of course, use missiles. It was to our understanding that the co-pilot should have the ability to adjust shield facings on the fly because it's a multi-crew ship. Unfortunately, the co-pilot doesn't have any ability to do that. So these are the weird inconsistencies that we're seeing now, and I'm sure CIG is addressing them. And of course, this goes without saying that most other multi-crew ships do not work properly right now with their co-pilot positions. Some of them do work with missiles, and some of them do allow them to use their turrets effectively. It's just that they are in an unfinished state. I went and played with an org mate in the Reliant Tana, and in the co-pilot seat, I couldn't actually see anything. I had no interface whatsoever. I couldn't change any of the power allocations. However, I still could use my weapons and I still could fire missiles. I just didn't have an interface. So it was definitely there. It just was in an unfinished state, and that tends to be the actual issue for a lot of ships right now. And so CIG is definitely hammering away at that and trying to get that sorted. But yeah, on that note, there's a lot of things that they can definitely improve. There's still minor issues here and there, bugs that still carry over, things that did get squashed, and new things that have come in. So they are going to hammer away at those and get those to the best they possibly can before going live. And so far, there isn't really anything super major that's caught my attention that I'm worried that they're not going to fix. And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, there is actually one major issue that I really would like them to address, which has been getting consistently worse and worse and worse with each patch. And that is the lag, the rubber banding, and the desync. And boy, howdy, have they gotten so bad so far. And what I would like to see from them going forward as we wrap this video up is I would love to see them, hopefully at some point, whether it's in this patch or in subsequent patches, do more to address a lot of the issues that people have been having with the multi-crew, like I mentioned, but also showing some love to the ground vehicles. We haven't really gotten anything ground specific yet. And that's a real shame because we have a lot of really fantastic ground vehicles, one of my favorite being the Anvil Ballista and of course the Nova Tank. And there's not really any need to use it. Of course, theaters of war, we're going to get a lot of action with those there, but in the PU, there just is no reason. I would love to see, like the demo we got many years ago, the Lear demo, where with the one with the sandworm, where you have a mission that's in an area that you can't access with a ship. You're going to have to either go on foot or take a vehicle and maybe run into NPCs that will attack you along the way. I would love to see that in the game at some point, but there just hasn't been resources allocated to yet, so vehicles are still kind of on the back burner and just kind of a thing that players have to sandbox, unfortunately. But that is me personally, what I would love to see them put some attention towards sometime between now and the end of the year if possible, but it remains to be seen. We'll see how it goes. Alright folks, that's it for me today. I hope you enjoyed this video where I just kind of expressed my thoughts and opinions on the coming changes in 3.14. And I hope you like this format. Like I said, I was originally going to do a tutorial guide for this. However, I did not eventually get to it because there was so much changing in the patches with everything from the missile operator, capacitor, and tunings that it just didn't feel prudent for me to do a guide and instead just incorporate that into my basic flight and basic combat guides. So let me know if you enjoyed this format, my giving me my opinion and just kind of rapping along here and kind of giving you my thoughts. Let me know if you enjoyed it. Leave a like and of course comment, let me know. Or if you hate it, hit the dislike button, let me know. I need to know what your guys' opinion are if you want to see more stuff like this. Alright, that's it for me today. Fly safe and I'll see you all in the black.
I don't even want to know what I look like right now.
Yeah, same.
Oh, I still got my wings.
I'm out of fuel. God damn it!
Wait, what?
Wait,
you're out of fuel.
I'm straight up out of fuel. I'm ejecting.